Hi everyone, welcome to the next online talk about culture, society and foreign policy in times of change. My name is Caroline Giel. I'm very happy to welcome you again. And today we will continue to speak about Ukraine and illegally annexed Crimea. I'm happy to talk with Nataliya Gumenyuk, who is a renowned Ukrainian journalist specializing in conflict reporting and foreign affairs, and she's based in Kyiv. Hi, Nataliya.
Hi, good to talk to you.
Millions tuned in to watch Nataliya's coverage on the Euromaidan revolution taking place 2013 and 14 and the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Her recent book on Crimea was published in Ukraine by February this year, and the German edition is right now being published by ibidem press in Stuttgart. So, Nataliya, we will speak today about Crimea, its people, and Ukraine. You're one of the very few journalists who regularly travel to Crimea. Now it's the 6th year of the annexation. So your book is called Lost Island. Also, the German translation is The Lost Island, Stories from the Occupied Crimea, Die verlorene Insel, Geschichten von der besetzten Krim. It's lost, but do you really think that the peninsula is lost, as the title says?
I should say that in Ukrainian and also in Russian, there are two different words explaining the word lost. There is something lost which you lose forever. In initial version, the lost, my lost is softer. It's something which you kind of while walking, you lose something and you even don't mention, or something is lost as among the other stuff. So I do think that, and for me, this lost is the second. I think that the Crimea is currently lost in a public perception globally as well, and that would be the closest to that. Also, I think it also was lost when there was then the Crimea annexation was in February 2014, but very right after that, the assault in the eastern Ukraine started. So the eyes were moved to the initial war. And even back then, Crimeans clearly understood that, like we will wait unless there is a fighting in the Donbass, nobody would care about what's happening. So somehow my loss is about that. But also, I think that we can find it. That's my lost means that it's something that you lose it as the key, but you can also find it. So the whole idea is about the searching the way how to find Crimea back. And of course, the island, the Crimea is peninsula, but yes, in the public perception here, it's distant. It feels like the people are somewhere. It is island both for Ukraine but also for Russia. Somehow Crimea has become a thing of its own.
Your German translator, Johann Zajączkowski, said in one of the recent book presentations that the Germans prefer to reflect upon geopolitics from their living room in peaceful Germany. But as you also mentioned, Crimea basically disappeared from the news and is really rarely covered in Germany. But why Germans, why Europeans should care more about what is currently happening in Crimea?
I think, first of all, there is a very clear explanation about the international law. First of all, generally still, I think it's unacceptable in 21st century when a part of the country is annexed by military force. And it creates a huge precedent for the geopolitics. But also, it's so close to everywhere, so close to Europe, to the US, and meaning that Ukraine. And We have a gross human rights violation currently now there, with about the repressions about the indigenous population of the Crimean Tatars. We have the newly created gray zone, where an important region where up to 2 million people living. And that can be stopped if there is any, discussion and another movement. But I try to make my book, and I put an effort to make it universal. It's, I think like I've discussed the translation with Anne Applebaum, the famous British American writer, and she said like, okay, for the English, it should be kind of a good title would be like Occupied, because this is a story about how all of a sudden a part of your land is occupied and what's happening to you. It's I think why we should care as well. I give it a totally different example. I've recently come up from the US reporting the US elections. And I did report them in 2016, also in the US. When I come in 2016 to Ohio and everywhere, I was asked about this fake news, and nobody understood what's that. What is a disinformation? How the public opinion could be manipulated to the extent that people are believing in a totally opposing version of the reality, which is not based by facts. I really had to put a huge effort to explain that. In 2020, there was no need to do that. It was very simple to explain to the people that, oh, there is a huge amount of people who all of a sudden totally believe a fully invented story, and they are adherent, and they are, very devoted to this totally invented version of the reality. And that's what part of the book is about. Now, discussing with international journalists, including the journalists from Germany, there is no need even for a German audience to explain why some of the people wouldn't believe in COVID, and they do not believe. So this book is about that. It's how today, all of a sudden, a totally new version of reality could be imposed of a particular group of the people, and it could lead to something which we couldn't expect. I do not want to wish to anybody get into the situation Crimeans are, but the probability of this situation is there. And now I can claim that there is no any like really historic or any other reason apart from Russian ambition to annex Crimea. You don't need to have a pretext. And this is a story about what humans, my book is about what a human like me, like anybody, like just a totally normal person who live in a peaceful place doing his or her own job finds itself in 21st century in the place which is occupied and annexed. So I do think that is the case why any person can relate to this book.
And how the life changed for people after Russian annexation?
So first of all, annexation is, Crimea compared to all other regions of Russia is under huge surveillance or attention of the Russian security forces. Somehow, it has become a kind of the gray zone. What I should explain about Crimea: a prosperous resort, which was famous for going there to summer for holiday season, as for instance Greece or Italy, all of a sudden becoming this gray zone, as for instance Transnistria or Karabakh or South Ossetia is there, where
so not every conflict region.
Yeah, like a really frozen conflict, which is cut up from the civilization. Of course, today in a modern world, it's different than in 80s or 90s. So of course, like you do have connection to Moscow and things like that. But many things do not work in Crimea. It's still not very good for running business. It's lost its position as a possible international resort. It's full of security service, law enforcement. Yes, there was a huge, quite a big investment from the Russian state to Crimea, way more than to some other Russian regions. So it's true that the roads are built and maybe the airport is built, but it's mainly for people who are coming from Russia. So I'm giving the example, that even if there is investment, it doesn't mean that it's directly help the people. So for instance, people are very proud that the Russia is very proud that they built some kind of a new highway from Simferopol to Sevastopol, two big towns. But on these highways, in the cases of the 8 towns, there is no even like the side road. So it is not made for the people who are living in the towns on this highway. They would never consider that they would use it. You can't get out. You need to make a huge turn. And I think it's symbolic in explaining how how Crimea is restructured. It's true that many resorts are bought by the Russian officials or becoming their private property. So even if there is investment, I know that in towns, for instance, like Gurzuf, the public beach could become the private property for some rich person or for some state institution. That's one point of view, and I think that is probably something which is less discussed. And of course, there is a huge and a big story about the repressions against the indigenous population of the Crimea. It's about the Crimean Tatars. We have more than 100 people, around 100 of people who are behind the bars, who are charged with no reason, for terrorism and extremism. These are mainly, and that's something to explain. It's a clear case of the discrimination according to the ethnic origin and also being the religious minority. So there are the persecution against Crimean Tatars. They are Muslims, and Crimean Tatars are quite they are the people, I would say, who are quite civic, who are quite moderate in their religious belief. There was never, ever in Crimea, ever single case of the terrorist attack, ever. But somehow this Russian tactics of pretending they are the enemies of the people because they are Muslim taking place. So there are the campaign searches in the mosque and things like that. So people do feel that anybody who sticks, who are a bit, who can be a famous in their community or like an important person in their community, a trusted or respected person in their community could be charged and put behind the bars with the very, very strict accusations, which makes people frightened. And it's about practicing them their language, their religion, and somehow ousting 300,000 people who do not have any other place globally because they're indigenous. It's not a minority, it's indigenous population of Crimea.
How many of them left after 2014?
Not really many. We do have up to 30,000 people who left Crimea compared to kind of million people who left the Donbas. The reason is very clear. The famous, there is a huge historical precedent when the whole Crimean Tatar population had been deported during the Soviet Union in 1944, right after the war, to the Central Asia for almost 40 years. Crimean Tatars fought for their right to come back to Crimea, and they were managed to get back just after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the independence of Ukraine in early 90s. So now the national idea of Crimean Tatars, where every single Crimean Tatars had been deported, is to stay and not to leave the land. So actually, this is also one of the most important reasons why they do not leave, because then they kind of would abandon their native land. So that's why the issue is about how do they survive in the place which belongs to their motherland, and they belong, preserving culture, preserving their place. Yeah.
And when you're thinking back about the time you spent in Crimea and interviewing people, which meeting you will never forget?
Shortly explain, my book is based on the every year travel to various cities and towns in Crimea, and I did talk to various people, because the way I work is really, to talk to Crimean Tatars, to talk to the Ukrainians, Russians of different political views, businessmen, people who are opposing so annexation, people who maybe used to support the annexation, those who I could reach, the average people who are apolitical, maybe the parents of the famous or relatives of the famous political prisoners, or like religious leaders, but also like mainly it's about the normal people. Yet I think one of the hardest story for me was to report on the mass shooting in Kerch in 2017. There were 20 people shot dead in the college by a guy who wanted to, repeat the Columbine incident in the US of the school shooting. And historically, it's the largest and the biggest massive school shooting in the history of the contemporary Europe, which was largely ignored by the international media, mainly because Crimea is far away. There are ways how to work for the media there, but it's difficult to get there. It's complicated. People don't know what's going on. There are other restrictions. We can speak about that later. But I happen to be the only Ukrainian journalist there. This story isn't connected to the annexation. This story isn't connected to the, it's in this regard, it's less political. I tend to be the only Ukrainian reporter from the Ukrainian mainland to be there. For me, the most important thing was just kind of by being there to say that we do care. And if we do not report on these stories, it means we agree that it belongs to Russia or something. And that was I felt like it's a must to be there, but it was extremely difficult to talk to the people there. It felt like the city where it happened, it's really, really far away. It's the furthest spot in Crimea. It's 4 hours drive from the capital of Crimea, Simferopol. And I think it was just symbolically maybe the most lost place globally. Even now, nobody remembers this case. People didn't know what to do. And what for me is still the most challenging, that even having the opportunity to, we can Skype with Crimeans. There is no to talk as we are
no restrictions
now. There is no restriction, there is maybe some, it's difficult, but I think that the lack of this common space, that they lost any connection to Ukraine, they lost any connection globally. Nobody could really help them. There is an international experience of how you cope with these tragedies, but it was never used. There is a lot how the psychologists who's worked there, how to cope in the city, what the journal, there is a lot of experience globally on this human tragedy, which is not political, which can be made for good for this resident of this town, but they are totally out of it showed like how abandoned they are. And I think that's for me the most memorable in a way story, just because it's out of this discussion about the annexation of the Crimea. It has nothing to do with Russia and Ukraine, but it shows that in this particular environment, how vulnerable the people are. And maybe COVID is another example where we also see that it's apolitical, but the annexation has a direct influence on the population there, because you don't know what's going on there. It's a gray zone. It's, there is a limited to the press freedom, uncomparable.
Yeah, how is it to
like
work
it's worse.
journalists in Crimea when you were traveling there? Can you speak Ukrainian, or you have to speak only Russian there? And how to go there?
So look, I think, first of all, it's possible to go to Crimea legally. The problem is for international reporters that they need to have the Russian visa, but according, not to violate the Ukrainian law, they need to come from the Ukrainian territory, which is very long way, but you need to require like 2 permission from 2 states. Of course, for any international reporter, getting to Crimea would be, you might be questioned by the security service or so. But I had a very interesting example recently when a colleague from Estonian television, who is a Moscow correspondent of the Estonian television, actually got the, got the permission, was there, was kind of with a public mission, came through Kyiv. But interesting enough that the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Russia said, like, go and show how good it is, you'll see. But he went and seen that it was not good at all. And he didn't have much restrictions on his way because he was from Estonia. He has a clear legend while he's there. It's maybe it would be more different for an American or a German. There would be more question, like to somebody with that passport. But it's maybe a bit more difficult for the Ukrainians, and at the same time easier because if you're not a prominent, if you're not representing a kind of a maybe the media, which would be considered very anti-Russian, you can come. You don't need visa. It's I think it's still like the travel regime as between Ukraine and Russia, and we were ready to travel. There is a not this year because of the COVID, but it used to be like a generally normal, like millions and people were crossing these 2 small checkpoints on annual basis. So it's possible. My problem is always about the keeping people to whom I talked safe, meaning that like I didn't want to talk to the security service or somebody because they would ask the questions, to whom you have talked, what did he tell you, all this kind of thing. So my idea was to keep the low profile. That's the reason why I probably didn't approach the officials of the annexed authorities, but I mean, I tried to make my observation. It's interesting that for me, it was also like traveling to the past.
Situation for you during your work?
No, I don't think so. Like I think how to say, I think that I'm doing my job legitimately. I'm a journalist. I'm not biased. I'm can explain. I think that this territory is still safer than the eastern Donbass run by the warlords. So you still, and I think like Russia partly can they don't have much troubles. They can question, they can, I don't know, maybe delete some material, but I do think it's my biggest fear. I don't want to become the story of itself. The biggest my biggest fear was to be caught, and that everybody would write about you being caught, and maybe that would be the the reason you would never get to Crimea again. So my reasoning is keeping low profile is there. You asked the question about language, and I found it extremely interesting because I mean, we are bilingual in Ukraine. Yes, some regions like Crimea were predominantly Russian speaking, but it was never an issue, really. And this was the first time when I really understood how, as if it was traveling to us. It's something which I read in the books of 50s and 60s, how the Ukrainian dissidents were speaking Ukrainian, and it was a sign of your political position. It was a sign that I don't know, you're nationalist even. So speaking Ukrainian in Crimea today is an issue because it's interesting situation with the Ukrainians in this regard, because if you're a Crimean Tatar, it's a distinct language of Turks origin, and somehow because Crimean Tatars are Muslim and they are not Christian, they are speaking a totally different language, not Slavic language. They have the right for having at least like being from a different ethnic origin. If you're Ukrainian, it's considered by Russians by Russian authorities in Crimea that you should be assimilated. You should admit that you are the same nation as Russian. You should admit that the Ukrainian language isn't existing. So even like announcing that I'm Ukrainian by origin or I'm speaking Ukrainian is a political position of not adhering to this policy of assimilation. And now we do not have, Ukrainian speaking schools or everything there. It's like a really, I don't know, it's like really existing globally today. I think it was something from the last century when the people could be persecuted because of the language and their ethnicity in various countries. It's really something I read in the history books of 19th and mid of 20th century in Soviet Union, but that's how I felt.
So I have two more questions. Which role Crimea will play in the next year for Russia, and how the international community can help? Because you also mentioned the human rights violations. So how we can, or how we should, we Germans, Europeans, international community?
No, Crimean fatigue is present also, I think, in the West, mainly because it feels like you cannot do anything about that. And also, I'm less hopeful about Crimea being freed unless Vladimir Putin is in Kremlin, mainly also because he had made it a very important part in the strategy of the use of the Russian history. Somehow they managed to create this myth that Crimea is a part of Russian historically and it matters, which is not the case for the Donbass, or it's not the case for Belarus or any other place. And therefore, politically, it's very difficult for Russia to have an exit strategy regarding the Crimea. At the same time, there are very, very clear human rights violations happening. There are up to 100 people in Crimea who are held behind bars without reason. There's a reason need to demand them being free. Especially during COVID, prisons are not the places where people are safe, especially if they are not in the best health conditions, and there are people among them who are there. There are citizens journalists who were, filming the court cases of the Crimean Tatars and who are for almost already 2 years behind bars. So the press organizations had really they're really there for being citizens journalists, speak for them. I should admit, I found it to be very, very the international media organization quite reluctant to get into this cause. We really tried to push that, but it's going nowhere. However, globally, there are cases when the international media organization are kind of speaking out for the citizens journalists in Syria or in other countries. So I do think it's critical. That would be something very, very, very helpful. It's very important that the international companies like Visa or MasterCard, or they were the problems of them working them in Crimea, now they again can work there. The big international companies, they often do not keep sanctions. They are working in Russia and working inside Crimea, though despite of the sanction regime. So I do think it's very important to and every this case, though it's really used politically by Russia to say that the world is accepting the annexation of the Crimea. It's a recognition. So every time like a Bosch company comes to the market of Crimea, it's considered to be the recognition. So there is a lot to do. So this is something which should be definitely done, because I think for me the interesting argument, which I finally make possible to kind of articulate in all the international discussions, and also in the discussions I have with the people from post-Soviet space who didn't know much what's going on. There was this argument that like, oh, but the pensions are high in Russia. All Russia invests some money. And this argument is quite a nonsense argument globally, because it gives, if you really stick to that, you need to explain that just because one country is richer than a neighboring country, it has the right for annexation, which means that, I don't know, Germany can annex any of the Baltic states because Germany is richer and can pay bigger pensions. US can overtake Mexico because, the salaries are higher and it's a better economy. It can, and this can happen with all the, every, Saudi Arabia can overtake all the Middle East just because, of course, they have more money. And that's the argument which is usually used in the public discussions in Europe and everywhere, which I hear from quite a respected people, because that's something which is most oftenly asked. And this is a very, very, very dangerous argument, apart from, totally ignoring the initial conditions of the people.
Nataliya Gumenyuk, thank you very much for your time. Your book is now available in Germany in German, translated by, amongst others, Johann Zajączkowski, ibidem, in Stuttgart. Thank you so much for your insights about Crimea, and yes, all the best to Kyiv. Thank you for being with us, and for you, everyone who is interested in further talks, just click the button and you will be informed. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest. I hope you all would enjoy, or at least would it would be helpful or interesting for you to read the book. Thank you.